Hi, I'm Alex. Welcome to my channel. Today's video, I'm going to ignore me. I have a cat here. Today I'm going to go over some of the common writing advice I have seen or read, give my take on it, and maybe toss in a bit of my own advice somewhere in the end there. Disclaimer, this is all my opinion. I could not give you actual advice beyond what my opinion is, but it's worth at least a laugh, if not an interesting thought point. So the first bit of writing advice I have heard so many times at this point that I basically am just like, okay. And that's to write what you know. I think that it's become a bit of a cliche as far as writing advice goes, and is often used far too literally. If you're someone like me who writes fantasy, I'm never gonna know what it's like to fight an orc with a double-handed broadsword in full armor. One, I'm not strong enough to do that. Two, find me an orc, because that would be amazing. Three, I might be able to learn how to use a broadsword, but right now I'm certainly not strong enough to do that. What I think the advice actually should be is write what you know you like and or love. I enjoy writing fantasy and I enjoy writing magic. Well, then that's what I should be writing. No matter what you write, even in fantasy, you're going to be doing some kind of research. And if you don't enjoy what you're researching, that's going to become very obvious very quickly. It also, what you know that you like tends to become the basis of your stories. It's overused on this channel at this point, but Tolkien had a passion and a love for languages. He created the Elven languages before the story. He wrote the story for that. I mean, he had other reasons, but his love of language drove so much of that story. And there should always be a driving interest in your story, whether that be cooking or languages or music. There should always be something like that. Now, obviously, if you're writing murder mysteries or whatever, you probably have some kind of passion for something in that. Clearly I don't. There's a reason I don't write them. But I feel like the advice of write what you know is just really broad, and it's not, it needs to be brought back into a more concise thing. And in my opinion, that's write what you know you love. The next bit of advice is one that I have had parroted at me every time, and I know I have a problem with this. But at the same time, show, don't tell. I know I have a problem with this. I tell a lot in my stories. And it's not that I don't think it is advice that is needed sometimes. But I feel like it's overused and it lacks an understanding of certain elements. Showing over telling is really good at getting emotions across, getting a reader to connect with a character, because it brings up a more understanding emotional aspect to it. But if you're doing a battle scene and there should always be parts of battle where you're connecting to someone in there so that you can feel empathy and be in that. But at the same time, if you're going through a battle scene and you're wanting to jump from part to part of the battle and you want this to be fast moving and you want it to feel, and you want to go through the clashing and this and that, at some point in that, you're going to need to tell, because showing frequently drags a story on. It makes it long. If you need that scene to go and be very rapid, which in action scenes is actually really important to keep the pacing, showing is not going to do that for you. There is a lot of aspects of that you just need to tell it and go. And I know I sound like aggressive, and that's not really meant to be how that comes across. But I think sometimes people forget that. It comes down to, like many things in writing, balance and an understanding of where your scene is going. If you want to stay in that moment, then yeah, showing's great. It does what it needs to do. But if you're covering a lot of ground really quick, the next bit of advice I found, or I was taught, was to avoid cliches, avoid tropes. I understand why. I understand why the advice is given. It's impossible. After about 2.6 million years of people telling stories, everything has been written. Everything is a trope in some way. Everything is a cliche in some way. You cannot avoid every trope and every cliche in existence. Well, in my opinion, the proper way of saying that should be put your spin on the cliche. 1001 people may have written the vampire love story or the vampire human love story or whatever, but you have not written it. Your take has not been given. Cliches are useful. If you want to very quickly get a reader to understand a concept, the best way to get them to understand it is through a cliche. It is your job as the writer to make that cliche interesting. But cliches and tropes are just tools in the writer's belt to get concepts across quickly and easily. Generally speaking, we understand that a character dressed in light, airy colors is generally the good person, and that dark, dreary colors are your mopey, dark people. Now, you may choose to put that and put a spin on that and make it the other way around. But if that is the cliche you want to go for, it has a purpose and can be used well. But you have to put your spin on that. You have to decide how it best suits you. And quite honestly, sometimes it is the best way to suck your reader in is to use a cliche that they are familiar with. Again, I sound aggressive and I don't mean to be. I just sometimes, that's one of those things where I'm like, please stop saying that to writers, especially young writers. Young writers are some of the most creative. Like, they'll be like, oh, what if this and this and this and this? That somewhere along the lines, writing teachers are just like, you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't be doing this. You should be doing this. And it's like, this is how we get. And then it's like, well, yeah, we have to end up leaning on tropes because you've told us not to do everything else. But it's also a great way that if you're learning to write or you're just trying to kind of get your feet into it, exploring a trope or a cliche might be a great way to just kind of step your foot into writing. Just work with one of them and see what happens. The last bit of advice, and which is by no means the last of the common advice out there, but for this video, the last bit of advice that I have heard innumerable times is to write every single day. Warning, I might get aggressive over this one too. Part of that reason is I am one of those people who cannot follow that advice. My brain is not wired to do that. I will burn myself out on writing if I write every single day. And then I won't want to write for months on end. It happens every time with NaNoWriMo. That's why I'm not doing it this year. I will burn myself out so quick if I do that. Now, given there are other external factors in that, but the point is, it's just not happening. Some people are not wired that way. They need to take a break. Now, some people, and I find that this helps me, if they can work on different projects every day, then they can write more. But some people, just for whether it's mental reasons, physical reasons, whatever, cannot write every day. They don't have the mental, the physical energy. They just can't do that. And by saying or giving the advice to write every day, it just makes those who can't do it feel bad and like they aren't writers because they can't follow this advice. And it's not right and it's not fair. I'm someone who also has an artistic venture that I'm trying to undertake. I am trying to get my art out. So there are days I've got to focus on my art over my writing. There are some people who have multiple things they're working on, and there are going to be days they can't work on the writing because they have to focus on something else because they have a deadline coming up, or they've got a project that's a really big project that they need to put more time into. And guess what? That's okay. For whatever reason, whether it be health or other projects or whatever, you don't have to write every day to be a writer. That story will get written. And quite frankly, to sit there and look at someone and be like, you must write every day? No, you don't. That works for you. But that is not a universal thing that works for everyone. I warned you I'd get aggressive over that. Don't blame me. I warned you. So that being said, what's my advice? Because clearly I've got opinions. I have 2 bits of advice. 1, consume everything. And by that I mean read. Am I saying read every day? No, I don't even do that. I haven't read in like 2 weeks. What I am saying is read everything you can get your hands on. Since I like reading fiction, that's what I tend to read. I do occasionally still read nonfiction though, just so that I have a more broad spectrum of things I've read. Recently in the last 6 months, I branched out into reading cozies. Just read everything. Because not only does this open you up to different genres of writing, you can learn from everything you read. Even if it's, hey, I don't like the way this is written. How can I avoid this in my book? Because you can sit there and be like, oh, I don't like this because. And that's really what, in my opinion, as long as you are learning, as long as you are picking up different things, you are honing your craft in some way. My second bit of advice comes back to our first topic of discussion, which was the whole write what you know thing. Write what you enjoy writing. If you like hearing hero-driven stories, write them. If you enjoy vampire novels, I think we all know by now that I'm writing one of those, then write that. There's a very good reason why you should write what you enjoy. Because you're going to stick to it and you're going to have a passion for it. And quite frankly, that is going to come through your book. I can tell you right now, a technically perfect book that you don't enjoy the topic of or you don't enjoy the story of is going to suck. And it's going to be 1,000 times worse than a book that is not technically perfect but you have passion for. Because passion is what drives everything. And I would rather read a book that's got some technical problems in it, that has a really enjoyable story to it, or that I can tell the author really loved, than a book that is just technically perfect, but there is no love in that story. Technique only gets you so far. Besides the fact that everything can be fixed in edits. So there is no perfect way to end that. Speaking of perfection versus. But that is my take on writing advice. If you guys have any advice that you've been told that you have your own take on, feel free to let me know in the comments. Share advice with each other. But as I've said with everything that comes to advice in my life, it's a grain of salt that you have to make work for you, and if it doesn't, then it's not the advice for you. I'll see you all in my next video. Bye.